Okay, hello. I'm with Kenny Laughton today, and he's going to talk about a few things about his time as being a veteran. He was a veteran that served in the Vietnam War, and one of the things that we wanted to first talk about was how he was politicised after the war. Correct?
That's correct, Julian. That's one of the subjects, I think, mate. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
you also wanted to know the reason why I joined up.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, you know.
So let's go into why did you join in?
Well, there was a few circumstances that happened. I was 17 and I had an older brother. He was 19, living in Darwin, and he got murdered up there. And it shook me up a little bit. And my father, he took it pretty hard.
How old were you when he was murdered at 19?
I was 17.
Yeah.
And I'd seen him 3 months earlier when I'd captained the Alice Springs side up in the rugby league to play against Darwin. And I saw him briefly, and then 6 months later he was dead. It was a bit of a shock to everybody. The old man, and I was the only one who went to the funeral out of the kids. I'm not sure why my sisters couldn't come. Anyway, I had to be strong for Mum and Dad because they were a bit shattered. And I never cried at my brother's funeral. And then I went back home to Alice, and Dad was doing it really hard, drinking a little bit, and I was starting to get lost. And a friend of mine was thinking of joining the army, so I thought, oh well, I'll join up with you. He was nearly 21. And anyway, in the end, his father, who fought in New Guinea, he wouldn't sign the papers, because them days you had to sign the papers if you was under 21. And so when I turned 18, Dad signed my papers and I went. He came down to see me off here in Adelaide when I went to Keswick Barracks, and then he went back to Alice Springs. But I'd already made up my mind that I was going, and that's how I ended up in the army.
Okay. And now I think we want to talk a little bit about the politicisation of being after the Vietnam War, because you said you were quite politically involved afterwards, and you were were you pushed in that direction by others, or was that all your own decision?
Oh, I guess it was my own decision in the end, but I had, fairly competent teachers. My father was an activist in his own right, because he fought for Aboriginal rights since he was a young fella. He was taken away. Both my mum and dad were taken away as stolen generation people. My mum was 18 months old when they took her. My father was 5, and he never saw his mother or father again. And so I decided that was going to be part of my struggle too. And then later, when I was a bit older, I was influenced by my cousin, the late great Charles Perkins, and he was the bravest man I ever knew, Uncle Charlie. And as I said, I get involved in Aboriginal politics then, and I read a lot when I came back from Vietnam about war. And you hear the politicians and everybody else talking about freedom and liberty, and it's all great in grand speeches, but the fact is, you can go back as far as Alexander. It's all about resources, whether it's humans as slaves or the mineral and natural resources that the empires, the colonies, that all cashed in on that. So,
like the oil in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah, well, same. I mean, you can go back, you follow history. Most of those Arab states were on our side in the Second World War, except for the couple that were French countries, with the Vichy French. They were on the side of the Nazis, but the majority of those people in the Middle East were on the Allies' side. And then in 1946, the British went into the Angola. Not the British, the French. They were the first in. In 1947, BP and Texaco turned up in Angola, and they've never left. It's about the oil resource. It's the same as the Golden Heights. That's why Israel never leave there. There's huge oil and gas reserves there, so they're never going to give that back to the Palestinians. And as I said, all these conflicts is usually about someone else's gain.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah, you were also talking to me briefly before this interview that one of the other reasons that you joined the army was not only because of the story that you told before, but also because you were hoping to get more kind of respect and acknowledgement.
Yeah, I think that was behind a lot of the Aboriginal lads that served, and you know, people forget that Aboriginal people have served in every war or conflict that white Australia has been involved in, you know, and it's very rare to get that sort of recognition. And there's a bloke who won, a lad from Victoria, won the military medal at Gallipoli. There's another lad who won the Distinguished Cross in DSO in the Somme. One of our top fighter pilots during the Second World War, flying a Kitty Hawk, was an Aboriginal pilot. You know, and if they were white fellas, they'd be all household names. You know, mate. You only see their pictures hanging up in the War Museum.
Yeah, and you think that they should do that as like a step forward, essentially, even though it's far in the past. And
yeah, no, they should have been recognised. You know, as I said, we always get the British history of this country, but you rarely hear about the Aboriginal people's history, no matter what side of it is, whether it's war or peacetime. You know, we're still in the back, and you know, whether the British descendants or the European descendants of this country admit it or not, Australia has a pretty dark history, you know, with colonisation, and despite that, and we were not a warlike people. This is the only country on the planet that never had full-scale war, because we never it was not in our nature to. So, you know.
Yeah, because it usually, like, if there'd be personal conflicts, but no clan conflicts with each other.
No clan conflicts, and most times it was settled ceremonially. It wasn't like someone was running around with huge armies massacring people. You know, that only happened when Cook arrived.
So you weren't. So the Aboriginal people when Cook arrived weren't kind of. They weren't. The idea of going to war was completely foreign.
It was, you know, it was very foreign too.
And one of the things that I find interesting is the way that the white people have treated the land, because as far as I'm concerned, the Aboriginals did a much better job of looking after the land than what has happened since white settlers have came here.
That was their job. That was our responsibility, was to care for land, you know. We didn't look at it and say, oh, that's a resource. That's why we were nomadic. We followed the seasons, so we didn't overgraze anywhere or whatever, and that's how it was. We tried to live in harmony with the planet, and you know, since the Industrial Revolution, I mean, it's just gone haywire. And
yeah, and it can't go forever.
No, I mean, how long is it going to take, you know, before people wake up? You know, I know there's
it depends if they ever do.
There's counter opinions and all this stuff.
Because it depends. If we go to outer space and people are going to go, yeah, we're just going to keep getting resources from outer space.
Yeah.
I'm getting slightly off topic though.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. That just shows that there's more to you than being a veteran. You're also an activist for Aboriginal rights.
Yep.
Yeah. And that is still talking about the political side of things. So I think
look at the Royal Commission back in '86. I got into the prison service in Alice Springs because I wanted to see why blackfellas were getting killed.
Oh.
You know, I copped a bit of flack from my own mob for becoming a prison officer. I didn't join the prison force to be a prison officer. I wanted to find out what the hell was going on.
And your mob didn't understand that at the time. Did they understand that after?
Oh yeah, they did after. But you know, there was a lot of evidence put up in '86, and here we are down the road, and there's nearly 500 deaths again. You know, and you think,
so it's the same problem.
When's it going to stop?
So it's the same problem resurfacing essentially.
Yep.
And do you think that would have been one of the? Because I heard that was one of the reasons why people were marching when Floyd got shot in Australia, was more to do with the Aboriginals getting hurt from
Yep.
prison sentences, because they do get it worse off,
Yep.
and then there's less of them in jail, so
Yep.
there's no reason,
That's
logically
right.
speaking, for that to happen.
No.
If anything, they should be getting less.
Yeah. But it seems to be that penal mentality is still here at the British board, you know, that, and it's almost like it's a task for the police to incarcerate as many Aboriginal people as they can, you know,
It
especially
wouldn't
the young ones.
It wouldn't surprise me. I honestly think a lot of like high power institutions are pretty evil.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking the same, mate. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, I don't want to go too off topic, so I won't mention anything else about that. But I can tell you a couple of things that are pretty ballistic about the powers that be. But I think one of the other topics that we were definitely both interested in talking about is funding of the veterans. And you were talking about earlier, before we had this interview, in that you were really concerned about the young veterans, because you think the old veterans are looked after better than the young veterans.
Well, not necessarily so, because it took them 25 years to recognise us, you know, and then they told us, oh, we can't cure your PTSD now because we left it for too long. So they've just given us medication and coping mechanisms, but it doesn't always work out. That's why I'm doing art. It's the best medicine I ever found. But I do worry about the young fellas, and every time the Prime Minister opens his mouth, he talks about how much funding they're putting into mental health for veterans, and yet we've got 24 beds at the Jamie Larkin Centre here in Adelaide. I mean, I don't know how many hundreds of veterans are in South Australia, but 24 beds just don't cop it.
Yeah, I'd imagine you'd want at least a few hundred.
Yep, absolutely.
And in various locations. Maybe if that was like one of 15 locations, it wouldn't be so bad.
That's it. So how many young fellas out there still struggling, you know?
Yeah, we looked up the statistics for the suicide since like the Afghan war earlier, and it was around about 1 every 3 weeks.
Yep. I mean, that's not acceptable, you know?
Yeah, we don't have a really large military force like in America either, so it's every death is a pretty brutal thing to occur. So it's, and these are young veterans.
The army
as well.
discharge you and say, till you go home and be normal. I mean, you can't be normal. The boys went, you know, we all went through stuff that most civilians will never see or do.
Yeah, and people in the army, you've got a purpose when you're going in there.
Yeah.
Is one thing that I've heard repeated to me by some of the veterans is that, and when you go out of it, you're almost in shock because your whole life has to change.
It does, you know. You've got to go back to the norms.
I think one of the things that actually needs to happen maybe is that there needs to be some kind of program that's there to support veterans when they're transferring from being in the army to like not being in the army. Maybe they can have some kind of program that gets you into
Well, funny you said that, Julian, because I've been saying it for years that, you know, don't know how many years you're in for, your last 6 months of your service should be in-house, funded by the military to help the young fellas cope with going back into civilian life.
Yeah, because you don't want someone serving for 6 months and then like committing suicide.
What happens? They wait till you crash and then they say, "Oh yes, we'll help you." I mean,
but you've already like run yourself into the ground and are in a terrible situation, because it's better to fix the problem before it gets really bad. Like, if a family member had that had like a drug problem, they'd probably get onto that straight away. They wouldn't go, oh, you know what, we're just going to let them almost OD and then fix it. That's the same thing.
You go into the ward and it's almost like a replay of an old movie, you know. I've been going in and out of there for 20 odd years, and I see the young fellas coming in and it's just a flashback. It just reminds me of me. You know, these young blokes have got the stuff they're going through. And I think, you know, there's got to be a better way. But as I said, politicians, every time they open their mouth, they're saying they're doing something for mental health for veterans. And as I said, we haven't even got enough facilities to do the stuff right.
Just reminds me of something my grandfather said. How can you tell if a politician's lying?
When they open their mouth.
Yeah, when their lips are moving.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. they're so far removed from the reality of it all. You know, that's the fact. We've had one or two veterans end up in Parliament, you know, but not many. So, yeah.
And that's over the entire course of the Parliament history.
Oh, I don't know about the Second World War sort of. I know there's a few fellows ended up in there, but you know, Tim Fisher was the lieutenant. He was in there for a while. And there was a lad from Western Australia, I can't think of his name now, but he had both his legs blown off, and he was a politician for a while.
Wow.
But like I say, they're rare in numbers, you know.
But that's the only two that you can think of, period.
I can think of,
Yeah. So we talk. There was another thing we were meant to be talking about. I should have written them down. Is there anything else that you can think of that you want to talk about for the interview?
I guess, meeting in this place here where we're doing the art lessons, you know. It's,
so
it's
what do you
the
what do you
best
think?
medicine I've found.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because you find that after doing artwork is one of the things that has helped you out the most, and do you that's kind of like that's one of the things that we want to do with this kind of project, is to try and get more veterans into doing artwork, because it can be quite therapeutic. And it gives you purpose. That's one of the things that I was talking about earlier, is that if a veteran finds doing their artwork, they can kind of like find something that's a purpose, and it's not necessarily for the country per se, but for themselves, which I think is important.
Well, Wednesdays I look forward to. It's the best day of the week for me. And again, it's that reconnection with younger and older veterans, Vietnam vets like me, and with the young fellas. And it's the best medicine I've ever found. I mean, I've done marijuana, I've done alcohol, I've done all the drugs that the shrinks give you, and the best medicine I found is painting and drawing. And it's like meditation for me.
Yeah, I find that drawing, when I draw, I find it like very purposeful, and sometimes I think I enjoyed it more when I first started, but the thing is, when you do it for a longer amount of time, it's more about the completion of the project. And the satisfaction that comes with that. Like every time I complete a large drawing that's like 2 by 1.5 meters, I'm always a bit satisfied from that, and that's what I get from that. And I'm imagine that you get some satisfaction from when you finish like a drawing.
Oh, absolutely, mate, absolutely. Well, it's like anything in life, you know, you set a goal and you kick that goal and it gives you a buzz, it lifts your spirits, you know. And that's why, and I said also that reconnection with these other veterans, it is the best day of the week for me.
Do you think maybe they should have like more of these around?
Oh, I would think so.
So say if they had like in 3 different locations, would you try to get to both or 3 of those locations during the week?
Oh, it'd be difficult for me, mate. I haven't got any wheels, so no. Well, I'm not sure about that one. You'll have to ask the other boys.
All right,
it is good medicine.
It is good medicine. Yeah. All right. Well, we've still got around about 5 or 10 more minutes that I want to talk for. We've went you said your father served in the war as well, didn't you?
My dad and 2 brothers signed up. Dad was had polio when he was 3 years old, and they sent him down to Adelaide to get those metal things put on his legs. But it didn't stop him. He could ride a horse as good as anyone. He was ringing for a while, and then when the war came along, he joined up. They sent him down here to Adelaide, and he was a driver at first, but coming from Alice Springs, he didn't know about traffic lights, so he went through a few red traffic lights. So they sent him to the medical corps then, and Dad said, look, I can't serve on the front line, but we had cousins over in New Guinea, and so he said, well, I'll do something for them. So he actually volunteered to go as a guinea pig. They used to have these wards over off the coast of Queensland where they was experimenting with mustard gas and cholera and malaria, and he was getting stuff treated for that sort of stuff, you know, and he thought, well, if I can't do it up front, I'll do it to help the boys that were over there. So he done that for a while,
Wow.
it didn't stop him, the polio, so, yeah.
So you volunteered to experiment with the
Yeah,
chemical warfare.
basically.
Wow. How are they testing that? That sounds like absolutely.
I don't really know that much, but he worked with a pretty famous bloke. His name was C.E. Cook. His initials were C.E. And he was a pretty famous, I don't know what he was, biologist or something. And they used to have a cartoon about him back in the days. It was called the Cordy Ward, but it was about this thing off the islands of Queensland where they were doing all this stuff, you know. As I said, Dad volunteered to do that for a while, and then he ended up looking after POWs over in Queensland and a few of the camps they had over there until the end of the war, basically.
Okay. It's quite interesting. Okay. I think that should do it. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
No, Julian, thanks for the opportunity. I hope you know we can get people to take a bit of interest in young veterans, and they need a hand, you know, mate.
Yeah.
And more than just governments in front of a camera talking about it, you know.
Actual action.
Yeah.
Not words. You don't have to say anything if you put the action in.
That's right. Put the money where it counts, you know.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll end it right there. Bye.